So, welcome everyone on BeyondPhrenology. And today we have with us Shraddha Karve. So, I know Shraddha for a long time, I guess since 2018 when, 2018? No, sorry, 2008. 2008, when I was at ISL Pune, and she was just beginning her PhD with Dr. Sutit Dey. And we are close friends since then, and she's my mentor and a lot more in life. So Shraddha has a PhD from Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research. And after that, she did her postdoc at University of Zurich. And she's one of the leading experts in microbial antibiotic resistance, or maybe antiviral resistance, in general microbial resistance, right?
Yeah, but more on bacteria.
More on bacteria, yeah. And although the podcast was supposed to be about the brain, that's how I conceived it when I started. But I decided to cover a lot more areas in which I'm interested. And this is one of the major areas I'm getting interested these days. And there's a lot we all should understand and take measures to address the issue. So welcome, Shraddha, to BeyondPhrenology.
Thanks, Madhu.
It's a pleasure to host you. Could you tell a little bit about yourself? If I had missed something in the introduction, I know words are too little to describe your personality and research.
No, I think you covered it. You covered it pretty much. But I just want to say that I come from a background where I was basically studying evolution in microbes. And during my PhD, I sort of landed on the evolution of antibiotic resistance as a phenomena when I was trying to study the response of bacteria to different kind of environmental changes. So that was not really what I had set out to look at. As you know, maybe pharmacologists or biochemists start with. My basic idea of studying antimicrobial resistance, or AMR as it is commonly called, was evolutionary. But after during my PhD and my postdocs, I've done a lot of fundamental studies, experimental evolution. It was started getting to me that the real game is happening in the clinics, in the environment where AMR is actually thriving now. So that's where I have made a shift now, or whatever work maybe I'll talk about today that I'm doing right now, which comes out as translational. Its motivation started from a very fundamental aspect of studying evolution in bacteria.
I see. So you did not have the idea that you would be doing this clinical translation research when you were doing
not
a
at
PhD?
all. Not at all. No, in fact, when I did my PhD, I will do anything related to antibiotic resistance. My idea was actually to study microorganisms, and I was asking questions related to fluctuating environments. So after I started looking at studies that were there in literature, it sort of struck me that everyone is always looking at adaptation to temperature, to sugar, to this, to that, but everything seemed very constant. And whenever you take out your eyes from the book and look out, you see that things are hardly constant, right? Environments are always changing.
Of course.
So my basic motivation was to sort of try and catch that in the lab, that, how changing environment will change evolution in bacteria.
Right. So if I remember those days, right, you used to, basically Petri dish was your thing, right? You were always culturing some bacterial populations, like probably midnights and in general, like, most of the day at odd times. So what was your response to people who told you, right, Shraddha, you were a brilliant student and, are you going to spend your life, growing these bacteria in the lab, sitting under the hood?
I mean, me, my usual response is none of your business, but
yeah, of course. Yeah. But still.
No, to tell you the truth, as I said, I actually first spent a couple of months, and I'm not sure, maybe we had just gotten to know each other by then, is actually trying to go out and study it. So I was studying one of the rivers near our institute. And it turned out that things go so out of hand when you directly go to the environment, and it becomes extremely hard to ask any controlled kind of a question. So I have spent actually nearly 2 to 3 months trying to go into this river, which was unfortunately full of things it should not have been full with. But it became very hard to sample something from there and keep studying it. But the bacteria that I actually chose to work with was isolated from there. So unlike most people who would take some bacteria that is refrigerated and start working with it, I actually went out to the river. I took out a bacteria, made an identification, submitted it to a repository. And then I said, okay, now I have this individual bacteria or colony of bacteria from the river, and now I will start doing some experiments on it. Of course, including my boss, whom you know very well, wanted to divert me towards other subjects. But I think since my bachelor's day, I've been kind of a bacteriophile, or whatever you want to call it. I had kind of decided that this is what I like and this is what I want to do. So yeah.
So by the way, I have Dr. Sutit Dey, he would be on the podcast next week.
Oh, that's great.
Right. And probably you were the only student who were not indulged with flies, right?
After me there were a couple, but before me, yes.
Yeah. So for the viewers, Dr. Sutit Dey was the one who used to kind of incubate all the
cantankerous fellows.
Exactly. Thanks for the words. I didn't want to impose that word on you, so thanks for choosing yourself. Yeah, so he would be here and we'll be discussing a lot more about science and education beyond what we will discuss today. So Shraddha, like what's the gravity of bacteria in our lives, and what is antibacterial resistance?
You see, actually in past half a decade or so, if you see, which was after I started my postdoc, you now see a lot of people talking about microbiomes, and we are getting a more nuanced understanding of this. But I think in general, we forget that how much of our metabolism, our guts, and in general, all our microbial associations, just for even an individual humans, they do a lot of important things. And in fact, studying human, this independent of its microbiome, doesn't make a lot of sense, as many people say, in terms of their physiology and other stuff. But even apart from that, if we see, so my attraction towards the system was multiple fold. And first of it is that if you look at the fundamentals of life, which is transcription, translation, DNA coding, protein machinery, whatever is it that you're interested in, and the process of evolution itself is identical in most animals, plants, and bacteria. When I say identical, I mean the principles of them are identical. They're lacking development. So you have any questions which is related to development, then bacteria is a bad system to answer that. But any other questions, now you can try and translate these faster multiplying beings to get to your answer quickly. It might not be an exact answer that translates to a higher organism, but it might be an answer that will guide you or point towards, the correct area that you should be looking at when you go to higher systems, maybe Arabidopsis, Drosophila, whatever it is that you're interested in. So this was a motivation with which I started studying bacteria. But as it turns out that after a point when you know a system sort of in and out, or you have worked with it, you actually start looking at the problems which are most pertinent to that system and humans. And antimicrobial resistance is probably the biggest problem or phenomena that we are currently studying with respect to bacteria. And I don't know, most of your viewers probably know, but you cannot imagine how big a public health challenge it really is. And I don't want to cry doomsday, but we are really entering an era where it would be dangerous for someone to just get their appendicitis done, because cutting a human being would mean getting infected with a bacteria that has, you don't know what kind of resistance, and it's very difficult to curb if you get an infection. So those who have not read the history, just before Second World War, most of the patients in the hospitals were actually those of infectious diseases. They were not of cancer, they were not of heart disease, they were only infectious diseases people, right? And even the wars were largely driven by how much casualties there were, because once you get an infection which is in a wound, you more or less have lost your soldier.
Right.
Hospitals over continent were full of TB wards, because tuberculosis was something that was spreading left and right. So only till after the discovery of penicillin, and when it actually became a drug in use, that we got some control of these infectious diseases. But the situation as it looks now, if we do not take very, very strong steps in every possible direction, we'll again in that era which is sort of called as post-antibiotic era, where your
Yes.
antibiotics do not work. So that's why I feel the problem is very, very pertinent and one of the most important one. And I am glad that your Beyond Phrenology also finds this interesting now, because we need to reach more and more people with this issue.
I was actually reading I read a couple of books about antibiotic resistance or antimicrobial resistance in general, AMR. And it was mind-boggling. I mean, as you mentioned, most of the deaths, I think antibiotics played a major role in wars and even in deciding, who basically won the war.
Absolutely.
And testing these antibiotics and the rate of discoveries of antibiotics which happened post World War II, right?
Absolutely. If for general interest, I think around 1950s, there is a US general surgeon made a statement saying we can close the chapter now on the infectious diseases. They thought that now that we have found the antibiotics, we can just probably not worry about infectious diseases anymore. Unfortunately, that prediction is completely falling apart now, 50 years later.
So a couple of years back, my grandmother, I visited my home and I was in Delhi at my uncle's place, and my grandmother had a fall and she was doing completely fine. We took her to the hospital for orthopedic surgery, and she was admitted to the ICU, to screen her vitals and put her in intensive care, and that's where she got infection, septicemia, and she collapsed in a few days. They couldn't even go to the surgery level. And since then, this has happened to so many of people I know or close ones of my friends and family.
Yeah.
So how big is
especially this? Septicemia.
Septicemia.
Sorry, go on.
So is it is septicemia a particular bacteria, or is it like in general, it can be caused by any microbe?
So septicemia term itself means that you basically have some kind of bacteria or bacterial toxins in your blood. So your blood is supposed to be completely devoid of any pathogen. It's a sterile fluid in your body. And the problem with blood infections is that, as you can imagine, blood is going in every part of your body.
Yes.
So as soon as you get an infection in blood, so normally the rate of, they say that septicemic patient, chances of survival of a septicemic patient are falling by every 20% every 8 hours after the infection happens, which means within a couple of days, basically, you're going to lose a patient if you haven't found out that which bacteria is it. And to answer part of your question, multiple bacteria can cause septicemia. So you need to find out what bacteria is it, and you need to find out what antibiotic will work against this septicemic bacteria. Unfortunately, like in your grandmother's case, and I don't know how many thousands of such cases are there across the world, that these pathogens are very, very hardy and they actually reside inside ICU. And when I say that, I don't mean to blame the hospitals. They're trying to take utmost care as they can. The problem is that even a slight slip of wash of hands, which we all have seen in COVID, how important it was, or even a transfer of one spoon to another, or something that is very human, right?
Yeah.
And these people are human. Something very human can actually transfer this organism from one patient to another. And the important point here is that we should not having such bacteria in existence to begin with. So we need to curb the resistance to such a level that, we can't have bacteria which are resistant to every possible drug that we have discovered. And these are these bacteria which you typically find in ICU nowadays, doctor finds what bacteria it is, but they have no means of treating it because it's resistant to every antibiotic mankind has known.
Okay. Kind of, made me speechless. So what is the cause? Like, why is it that suddenly we have antibiotic resistance and so much of it? As well as before, can you go through, I read some of your work and it talks about the evolution of evolvability itself, right? It's kind of an exponential process, right? Can you start with that example, which you always give, a bacteria divides and you ask the student when would be the bottle of bacteria half full or full, right?
Yeah.
Can you give an idea of bacterial growth?
Like I said, when I started studying it, my idea was that everything around you is changing. And it is also same for bacteria. You have to imagine that maybe you take a river body, you go there, you measure every 24 hours say what was the pH, what was the salt, what was the temperature, what was X, Y, many different parameters. And you see that they change. Even if you do these measurements every hour, they change. Remember that this is something we're doing at a very macro scale as compared to the bacteria. Bacteria is a 5 micron in size, right? So basically you could have thousands of them on a tip of a needle. They're very, very small. So their micro environment, the environment around them is changing continuously. So the idea that I was trying to study was that if you have environments that are continuously fluctuating, the bacteria that is in the end going to win, and by win, I mean is going to have maximum number of its progeny, is the one that can respond to these changes. You do not need a particular kind of character to begin with. You don't need to be tall, short, fat. I mean, whatever it is, the parallel of that in bacteria, you don't need a particular character. What you actually need is a good response time, right? You need to be able to generate the variation, being able to respond to the environmental change. And that was the idea of evolution, of evolvability being your capacity to evolve. So we actually, in bacteria, when you look at it, you can pin down a certain mechanisms. And I can give you a very simple example. Let's assume you have a mutation rate that is tuned in to exactly that level where you can bring in a variation at a speed of the environmental change. Not more, because more means you are wasting a lot of mutations. You're getting unnecessary mutations, not less, because you're not getting enough mutations. But if bacteria can tune in a mutation rate to be exactly match the environmental rate of change, that bacteria might be the most evolvable one or the most suitable one. So this was the idea. And actually in this context, when I was studying the evolution against all these different parameters, hydrogen peroxide, so oxidative stress, which is coming up a big thing in humans now, but oxidative stress, salt stress, pH stress. And I was doing, I'm sure you remember, day in and day out, like I said, I was doing random things with these bacteria. I suddenly noticed that without even any exposure to antibiotic, these bacteria were getting resistant to them. The ones that I had, evolved in oxidative stress and salt and different kind of things, which only tells me that it is not evolution to a particular thing, but it's idea of being evolvable, right? Now you throw antibiotic at them, they are better at it. You throw heavy metals at them, they are better at it. You even throw something like those who are science buffs here, it's called Ethereum bromide, which you basically use to kill anything you have, right? It goes and intercalates into your DNA. My bacteria could adapt to them. They were growing fine in the presence of ETBR. I have literally had flasks full of ETBR media and the bacteria living happily inside.
That's like humans evolving to drink cyanide, right?
Exactly the same. Or it's like you put a nose to someone and they are just happily browsing their mobile. It's just the nose is not working anymore. Right? So that was the idea, and that's where I came across the antibiotic resistance part. And then I started looking more into it, that what are the different reasons for which we see antibiotic resistance. And I think that sort of ties back to your question, that why do we see so much of antibiotic resistance now? So the first thing I want to mention is that antibiotic resistance is as normal as anything we have known. It has been there before human beings came into existence. It is not even true that, so what is antibiotic? One bacteria makes it to kill another one, right? Because bacteria are fighting within themselves. If you give them a habitat, they're fighting for resources. So they need to kill each other as well, just like any other organism. Humans or any other organism, right? So it's a competition means. So antibiotics have been around. Fungi secrete them. A lot of living microorganisms secrete them. More importantly, it is not so that antibiotics are only limited to what we have searched. So I give you an example. In around 2008, I think they found, when they bore down the inside, they found a bacteria which were harboring resistance to man-made antibiotics, right? Which means there's no way.
Could you repeat, Shraddha, this? Because I think because of internet connection, your voice got lost.
Okay. So I was saying that around 2010 sometime, they found that when they bore down like 8-10 feet down in Antarctic wells, they found bacteria which were resistant to man-made antibiotics. So there's no way man-made antibiotics had reached at that point of time 10 feet down the Arctic well. So the resistance, we are seeing it as resistant to antibiotic X. It is basically just a phenotype or just a trait, just a character for a bacteria, right? You can imagine, given the infinite number of bacteria that there on Earth, been around for billions of years, I think every possible character of resistance has evolved somewhere or the other. I mean, I'm making this sweeping statement knowing how infinite the numbers are.
Yeah.
It's just that it was never getting selected. It arose by chance, like every evolution process, and then it just died down because there was no advantage of possessing that trait, right? It's like saying that someone could, starting from Christ's time or whatever time we started calculating, there were people who were extremely fast at typing. It's just that computers were not around. Right. So even if you could type very, very fast, so what? Nobody knew, that it is advantageous.
And probably if Mozart would have been there today, Mozart might be a good programmer or something instead of, in some writing music. Yeah.
So, and and this is a sort of an area which is called as evolution of novelty. It has many different implications, things like wings, things like eyes. They have been evolved multiple times that we know of. It means that they evolved even more times. It's just that they were not useful when they evolved. Now, what has happened with antibiotic resistance is that once humans started using them, we use them at an extent, not just for humans. Now we give them to animals, not only as treatments. We give them as growth boosters. So if you go to any animal husbandry now, every animal, independent of whether it has a disease or not, is given an antibiotic dosage. Their fodders are full of antibiotics.
I mean, what kind of quantity are we talking about, and how does it promote growth?
So it is, to tell you the truth, the correlation is not absolutely clear. My idea is that it may actually have some kind of disease preventive role. So you're already on antibiotics, so you're not getting disease. That's my idea.
It's kind of a prophylactic.
It's kind of a prophylactic also, but it might actually be, because you see, antibiotic are these small molecules. They might be mimicking some of the growth promoters as well.
Possibly.
They are very good. It's also possible. And I must admit that I really don't know what a clear connection is, but in fisheries, in fodder, in agriculture for plants, the antibiotics have become a norm. Basically, we have started sort of, saturating every environment around us with antibiotics. What does this mean? This means anytime you evolve an antibiotic resistance phenotype, it has a huge evolutionary advantage. So now it has started getting selected to an extent that it has never happened before. So evolution of AMR itself is not at all new, but the selection of AMR to this extent is a man-made phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. No, I've noticed this firsthand, when I was a kid, and for me, it was seasonal. I would always get some kind of bacterial, basically, cough infection, throat infection, and it would be some antibiotic which would work. And eventually, over the time, what I've seen is that now, for the last few years, there's only one antibiotic called roxymucolite. It's a mix of roxide and mucolite. That was the only antibiotic which was effective. And I don't know if I get resistant to that, what kind of solutions are available for.
See, I mean, that is also one of the problems that we have become so impatient that I think that before, when you would get a cough, I think you would wait for a couple of days to see whether it worsens or it becomes less and less. If it sort of becomes less, you do not go to the doctor and you just, let it be. But now, because we cannot miss a work day, as soon as you get an inkling of cough, you go to the doctor, get an antibiotic. So you never know whether it was a viral or a bacterial.
Yeah, for me, it was, I would let it go worse, and only then I will do it,
exactly.
as usual with my other things. But but I see your point. Yeah, this is what I wanted to ask you. So as you said, like, we don't even know whether it's antiviral or which we should take, or whether we should take antibiotics. But how do we figure out, what is a diagnosis that you have a viral infection versus you have a bacterial infection? And I was always puzzled since childhood that, people will say like, oh, it feels like you might have a viral infection. Why don't you take antibiotics? And I always wonder, that's like saying, my favorite color is pink. That's why I'm wearing blue, So
yes, I mean, once you start talking about AMR as a problem and not as a scientific phenomenon, it turns out that so much of problems with AMR are now beyond science. I mean, beyond science in the sense that they're not scientific problems anymore.
Yeah.
They're economic problems. Yeah, they're sociological problems. They're economic problems. They're cultural problems, you know. And that's why I think it helps to have awareness around, because these problems cannot be solved by working in a lab or even just changing the policies. So for the kind of question you asked, for example, you know, behind initially when doctors started prescribing antibiotics was simply this. See, you go to the doctor and you say that you have cough. If you have a viral cough, even today, most of the viral cough and cold is supposed to get better in 3 days, 3 to 4 days at max. You start feeling better. You know, you might not get completely cured, but you see that you are in already in your disease is regressing. If it is bacterial, though, it is hard to regress in 3 to 4 days because, you know, it depends on where the infection is. It might be well hidden from your immune system. So even if it's bacterial, your immune system might not be able to take care of it, and you might actually need antibiotic help. The problem was that when you go to the doctor on a first day and doctor tells you that, oh, it is just 1 day, go back home, come back after 4 days. The patient psychologically immediately thinks this doctor knows nothing.
Yeah.
Repeating a visit to a doctor for a cough and cold is just a mental block. You think that I should have gotten a medicine, a pill or something, and I should have been fine within 4 to 5 days, while his doctor, which you think is an idiot, asked you to come back after 4 days only when she or he will give me a medicine. As soon as it happens, doctor notices their patient numbers are going down, right? And these are physicians who work closely with families.
Right.
So I think a lot of initial practices began with the idea of that, you know, you just give an antibiotic. In case it is a bacterial infection, it will be better. If it's viral, it anyway doesn't matter.
It was in good faith.
It was in good faith thinking and also in economic interest that I should retain my patient, right? Because explain all this to a patient and think of a setting like India where your patient might not be educated or even have a capacity or time to understand all of this, right? Doctor should be able to. Doctor should have time to explain this.
Honestly, this is not specific to India. No matter the GDP of the country, you can have GDP has nothing to do with medical literacy.
Absolutely. And you know, also the time that doctor can actually put in, but I hear that is also less in one of the, I have also experienced it firsthand, you know, even in so-called developed countries, doctors may have very little time to give to a patient. And, you know, you cannot explain all of this to a patient in a little time. Right. So it's better to just prescribe the drug. This is how initial prescriptions of antibiotics began. Now, if you look at the kind of problem that you mentioned before, something unfortunate that happened with your grandmom, it is of a different kind now. Now that you have started seeing that resistance occurs, whenever a doctor is performing, let's say, a surgery, a major or a minor one, they just want to be very sure that their patient is not under danger. But this has led to the top of the, so if you actually look at the surgeries now, they are using last resort antibiotics even before any infection has happened. Right? And the point is very tricky. I mean, before you blame a doctor, you should give it a thought that doctor is now going to cut open this person, right? And they want to take every possible measure that the patient, it's a good intention. I'm not saying it's a bad intention, but that single good intention, when happens 1 million times, it mounts up to a bigger problem now that you have no last resort drug next time you want to cut open a person. Right? So it's a very complicated problem. Where do you start addressing it?
No, I had this experience firsthand. I was 5 years old. I still have all the memories. My mother had a tumor and hernia, so she got operated. It was like a long 7-hour surgery. And I used to go to visit her in school, and we didn't know whether she will come back. So we took her autographs and took family pictures and everything. And there used to be a nurse who used to come like every few hours and inject like and this is like 96, I guess, or 95, somewhere in early 1990s. And she would inject like a 10 to 15 ml of antibiotics in her body, like every few hours. And it was before 2 days before the operation until several days after the operation. And then later she had another surgery, almost a decade later, for gallbladder. Her gallbladder was removed. And that happened in a different hospital, which was much better, which had better, circulation in ICU and, and different mechanisms to reduce the pathogen load. Much less antibiotics were administered in that case. So, with that example, I have seen declining antibiotic use as well with better technologies adapted in the hospital. So have they not helped curbing this problem even a little?
Yes, and this was what I'm going to say. I don't want to paint a bleak picture or say I was trying to paint a picture that problem is complicated. It doesn't mean it does not have an answer. So, for example, I recently started working with one of the hospitals here in Pune. And see, what you need to know is that there are ways of dealing with this. It's just that these ways are not from X shift to Y. These are more nuanced ways. So the person now hospital has invested in a doctor who is in charge of what is called as antibacterial stewardship, which means that the doctor is not only looking at what antibiotics doctors can use, but he's now actually doing a very, very nuanced surveillance inside their hospital premises. So he knows that, yes, ICUs might be harboring some pathogens, but he knows what pathogens they are. He's monitoring their resistance levels weekly. What that happens is that he can at least curb all the unnecessary antibiotic usage, right? He can say that, okay, you don't need to prescribe X and Y and Z. Just give Z. We know that whatever we have, whatever the patient is at risk, Z would be enough, to protect your patient. And see, doctors are, we cannot underestimate their intentions as well as their capacities. If you tell a doctor with data saying, see, these were the mortalities in our hospitals, this is why they happened, this is what we isolated, this was a resistant pattern, it seems, and this has gone beyond the paper now. People have built apps now where you can do the live tracking. Clinicians have access to this. It has started happening, but we need to increase the sort of the coverage of this, or make a common man aware that, your doctor is trying, but there are these limitations and these are the answers to the limitations. So you should insist, you should ask, what antibiotics are you giving to my kin or to me if you're admitted in a hospital? Why are you giving these to me? Because such kind of awareness will also help doctor to take measures, that my patient now knows. My patient asks me why, how so? And so all this sort of knowledge at the level of stewardship, at the level of clinicians, at the level of patient, basically helps us control the total dissemination of antibiotics into the environment, not just hospitals, but also outside. So please make sure, those who, already think of what food they are buying, especially from animal source or even plant source, please try and check if you have any means of checking, because now, for example, paraben has become a keyword in cosmetics. People know it's bad.
Yes.
But start asking whether antibiotics were fed to your animals when you, if you have access to, if you go for a fresh milk in a, nearby, you can always ask, are you feeding antibiotics? Because mind you, those antibiotics are coming into your, have chances of coming into animal products as well, right? So you're basically consuming antibiotic residues without even knowing it. So I think this awareness would definitely help.
Right. So how does it interact with your gut microbe if you are consuming these bacterial elements? Antibiotics.
Yeah. So in a dosage that is given therapeutically, that it basically wipes out your flora clean. That's why you need probiotics, right? So many a times clinicians will give you a probiotic pill or ask you to take a probiotic suspension, is because many antibiotics literally wipe your flora clean at the dosage that they're given therapeutically. But if you're only consuming residues, even that will have an effect. You might not be taking antibiotic as a treatment, but let's say you're eating something which is full of or has antibiotic residues, even that will affect the flora of your gut, because you're basically exposing them to the antibiotic that you're eating.
Interesting. So given the recent, a lot of insights we have got now that how gut microbe or gut biome determines your health, your cognition, in fact, your rate of aging. So we are basically hindering ourselves and our future in all possible ways by consuming these antibiotics.
We definitely are, but I don't want to say we know the extent of it. So you can either be an optimist and say not to a large extent, or a realist and say to a considerable extent, and pessimist to say is we have destroyed it.
I see. Okay, so on that note, being a pessimist, realist, and optimist, what kind of future are we looking forward to? So, for instance, let's say we do not do anything more than what we are doing right now. So how bleak or how bright are future surviving with these AMR biomass is?
See, so I assume that when you say we do not know anything more, you mean anything more in a negative sense. So we don't increase the usage. We don't try and, but at the same time, we have to do a lot in a positive sense. And what is a positive sense is this.
So I want
one
to,
is,
yeah, no, go ahead.
No, what do you mean by it?
So my question was that let's see, if we don't do much, we understand the problem and we just let it run its course.
Oh,
or we do something,
yeah,
or we do every possible thing. So in these three scenarios, what kind of future are we looking for ourselves and our next generation?
Yeah, so you don't do anything, or you do little something. You're basically stepping on a nail, probably getting a tetanus and dying. That's as simple as that. Okay.
You mean within a few years? Within our lifetime?
No, when you get tetanus, you die in 48 hours. So basically, you be scared of infections. If you do nothing, or you do very little, basically infections are going to come and get you. You will be in post-antibiotic era. You will be an era where antibiotic does not work. It's better to wait for your appendix to burst inside your stomach than cutting open and removing it.
And how soon? How soon in the future? How many?
I mean, so see, infection is a chance event. So you can completely quarantine yourself, sit in a room, and probably hope that I'll be alive for 10 years. But if you really plan to go out there where there is a chance of infection happening, and I'm not talking about viruses here or only respiratory ones.
Yes.
But I'm talking about, see, overall bacterial infections, if you see, unlike viral infections, they target more the immune compromised, the old age, and people with comorbidities.
Yes.
But you must have seen in Corona that how many people were unaware of their comorbidities. Only when Corona hit,
yes,
they realized that their body was not at their best.
Right.
So this is what will happen with you. You know, I can't give you an age limit, but let's say a person who would have with antibiotics lived, I'm sure, up to late 70s and 80s, you don't know, as soon as something struck, you realize that your immune system is not what you thought it used to be. Simple example, people with autoimmune diseases now regularly take steroids. I know people who take steroids from the age of 30. Right?
Yes.
Steroids are killing your immune system, but you're surviving by a chance that if you get an infection, there is an antibiotic to save you. You're not only relying on your immune system.
Yeah.
But if there is no antibiotic, it means you either have to live with your autoimmune disease, which some of them are really, really hard to live with. People
very
with
painful.
rheumatoid arthritis. Exactly.
Yes.
So you cannot risk taking steroids, because steroids going to demolish your immune system, which means any infection could have a life-threatening effect.
And a lot of even steroids are used for treatments, like you have a traumatic brain injury, or you have edema in the brain, you are on high doses of steroids for a long time to reduce those inflammation.
Absolutely. But those are the kind of events that person is at least aware of. But do you know, people with things like psoriasis, it just seems like something on your skin, and you are taking steroids for literally decades of your life, right?
Yeah.
So your immune system has paid its price. You are not realizing that price, because every time you get an infection, you get an antibiotic before it becomes life-threatening. Right. So your immune system really never has to fight. But in a post-antibiotic era, it's only your immune system which will have to fight, which you have already compromised by taking.
Yeah, with almost everything, from basic exposure to kind of lifestyle we have, to our diet, to fitness.
Absolutely.
In every possible way, we have compromised our immune systems.
And in fact, we have compromised our immune system by not exposing to any things it has to fight. We sometimes try to live such sterile lives, not even get a wound as a child, especially.
Yes.
That, you have basically just not let it thrive completely. So this is a scenario if we do nothing, or we do something very little.
Yes.
So only option we have is to do a lot and everything that we can. That is the.
So what does that entail? And does that have to be like a very local kind of effort? Like, for example, a country like India with a lot more population and tropical climate should do much more compared to a Scandinavian country where bacteria are less likely to flourish and thrive and cause resistance?
So see, again, now the answer going to be a lot of sociology, politics, and economics here, right? But a simple thing is, I think that every individual, what they can do is that have an awareness. And I'll give you a simple example of awareness. So, now with technology, whatever we call it, for example, you and me, now we're talking across continents now very comfortably. But I think we also need to make sure that important things get transmitted. For example, you might remember that till very recent years, I mean, I remember this like till 2015, maybe, I was not aware that now WHO actually recommends that if you're taking an antibiotic dosage, without any diagnosed bacteremic disease. So you basically have been diagnosed with, you have with XY bacteria, you have an infection. That's why you're taking an antibiotic. If it is not so, if you're only taking it for cough, cold, or whatever it is that is being given, if you feel okay after 3 days, it is actually now better to stop the antibiotic usage. You remember, we were always told that never stop it in between.
Yeah, take
always
the full course.
Complete. Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, with the survey and the data, WHO realized that more than half of the instances, it is not bacterial. So what you're doing is that every day you're putting it in environment. You're eating it and you're putting it in environment.
Yes.
So for AMR, it is actually better that you stop after 3 days.
Yes.
The chances of the bacteria becoming resistant and hitting back are so minuscule that asking someone to continue the antibiotic dosage is actually against the purpose that we are trying to serve.
Right.
So these kind of very simple things, first of all, should percolate to the common people around the world. That is one. Second, we have realized now that especially in highly populated areas or countries, we cannot really have real antibiotic tracking. Like so for example, in a Scandinavian country, every antibiotic dose that is dispensed is accounted for. Every infection that happens, it is accounted for. But with a given kind of infrastructure and a population, it is possible. But it is not going to happen. Even probably many Western countries, they will not be able to cope with such minute level of tracking. But what you could have is some kind of society-based tracking. And we also have some outreach projects here where we are now trying to sort of pose. So one of our outreach programs is to talk with high school kids, make them aware of all these different things. And we are trying to do this based on housing societies. So you can have a steward in your housing society where anybody in a housing society takes an antibiotic has to report to your own steward. The data doesn't go anywhere, but just this idea that you have to report it to someone when you take it makes you think twice that, do I really need to take it?
Yeah.
So it's just it's a very small mean, but it works to prevent you from doing something you shouldn't. These are about the small things.
Yeah.
The bigger things now is that starting 2015, and UK was a pioneer in this, they started realizing that one of the main problems, two of the main problems in AMR is that we do not have a diagnostic measure which is on the table and within few hours can tell you whether it's viral or bacterial. I don't need to know whether it is which bacteria, but I just need a classification that it is viral or bacterial, which means the physician the same day can tell a patient, even online or over the phone, that you can just take this medicine. If it is sure that it's antibiotic. So that is one thing. And now there is a lot of move towards having rapid diagnostics for this. That is one. The second is that if you actually check the discovery rate of antibiotics after I think 1970s, there hasn't been a single new antibiotic class, right?
No.
And reason is simple, because pharma companies have no motivation to do it. Antibiotic is too cheap. Person is not hooked on it for life. Person is not hooked on it for life. So for them, cancer, diabetes,
only the chronic diseases get you a lifetime customer. It's kind of a subscription
Alzheimer's.
To pharmacology.
Exactly. It's the Netflix of pharmacology, right?
Exactly.
Once you're there for a lifetime. So, but once identified, now there are two kinds of things that are happening. One is governments worldwide are trying to give subsidies, promotions to these pharma companies if they invest into antibiotic research. That is just a commercial angle to it, trying to promote their own interest. The second is that now, and I think scientists have some role to play in this. I have also interacted with some of these pharma companies, and we have made them aware now that many of your products actually depend on people coming to hospitals. And now the way antibiotic resistance is going, people will be just scared of visiting hospitals. You're not going to get cancer patient getting chemotherapy. So basically all your other drugs now are going to suffer because you have such a high prevalence of antibiotic resistance. And this has sort of made an impact on them, that they realize that their investment till date could just go down the drain if they do not now start. So there has been some move, but we need much more to increase basically discovery of new antibiotic drugs. Because simply, even with the current usage, if you actually manage to discover a new class of antibiotic drugs, you would have bought yourself almost a decade. For other efforts to sustain. But I'm saying a new class of drugs, not a simple modification of something that happens continuously.
Given how much we know about cell biology, given how much we know about bacterial evolution or microbial evolution in general, given how advanced our genetic recombination technologies are, I don't think this should be an issue. If you look at how we solved the problems in the past, like we had Manhattan Project, right? We pulled a bunch of scientists together, put them under a hood, and you are there for 5 years, you need to design a bomb, right? And there was no existence bomb of that atom bomb 5 years back. So it's that kind of problem. And it probably needs that kind of resources and that kind of leadership, right?
That kind of dedication, that kind of leadership. I mean, just think of all the nationalities from which talent was drawn in Manhattan Project, right? So you really need to go global about this and say that we need an effort from, doesn't matter, private player, government player, what party, you just need to think beyond that.
The same one was for the moon mission. People give credit to NASA, but there were like thousands of private companies which were part of subsidiaries at that time.
Absolutely.
Designing different parts.
And I also totally think that it's possible, because I mean, just look at this thing that, so many, bacterial and fungal species have managed to coexist.
Yeah.
Right. All of them are basically trying to kill each other for resources.
Right.
In a simple way, right?
Yeah.
But they managed to exactly.
We need to find a friend. We need to find the enemy.
Absolutely.
Be friendship with that enemy, right?
Absolutely.
Find a friend who is the enemy of your enemy.
Yes. While we are doing all these other measures which are socio-political, we need a targeted effort in science to actually do this.
So I was reading something about bacteriophage and how bacteriophage could be, potential kind of a panacea for it. Do you think that would be the case? So that might be the case.
The story of phage has been around for at least 10 years now.
Okay.
And I think there have also been cases where terminal patients were treated. There are a couple of success stories. All of it is true. See, the problem is that whenever you're talking about phage, you have to realize that it is partially living thing, right? Yeah. Which means things are not exactly under your control, like in case of antibiotics, right? Yeah. So there are going to be literally n number of things which have an interaction between phage and bacteria, and it's really very hard for you to give it as a therapeutic out and out. So as soon as there is an RNA and DNA, this is the matter that made life. It has a huge potential, right?
Yes.
Which means that as soon as you put it somewhere, it can do God knows what.
Yes.
So we are trying to know what all this God knows what includes, and we have made some headway, but we are still, not there that you can start prescribing a phage. That is one. The current, something more recent is called as antimicrobial peptides, AMPs.
Yeah.
So antimicrobial peptides are basically what your immune system makes when you have a bacterial infection, right? So these are not really drugs, but they are peptides. What it says, chains of amino acids.
Yeah.
Right. And when AMPs were described, they were clearly hailed as alternatives to antibiotics, and they will replace all the antibiotics soon. And we soon realize that your immune system is doing this in a very, very nuanced way. You can't really say that you have an infection X and every individual will make Y to kill it.
Yeah,
it is extremely complicated. So now there are AMP candidates, which people have also started using in therapies. There, the biggest problem was that as soon as you put in an AMP inside a human body, it recognizes it as foreign and starts killing it.
Yes.
I mean, antibiotic is small enough to not trigger your immune response, but kill bacteria.
Yeah.
But peptide doesn't have that property.
Yes.
Peptide basically. So currently the biggest problem in AMP, AMR research is that the microbial peptide never reaches the site of infection. Your immune system just kills it beforehand.
Right.
Right. So all these things are upcoming, and we definitely need more research in it. But none of them can, I feel, still match a discovery of new antibiotic drug.
So a lot of what... A lot of what works in the Petri dish and in the lab and gets us high impact publications, put them in the human body.
Okay, let's not even talk about publications. But let me tell you, let me give you an example. So it's not just, there is a lot of genomic chatter right now. We do a lot of surveillance doing genomics, the sequence of bacteria. And what is the purpose of this? There are some which are so well studied now that you can say that, presence of this gene means it should be resistant to that. It's so well correlated. And now that we start looking more and more, we have started noticing examples at the frequency of 5 and 10%, which is huge, that you have gene but no resistant, or you have resistance but no gene. And this is only in Petri plate. Now, if you go and talk to the doctors tell you that lab has done an experiment, our hospital lab. They had found a gene In a Petri plate, they had seen a resistance, they had seen a sensitivity. But when we give this to patient just doesn't respond. So there is not only a lag between what you see in genes and what you see on Petri dish. There's also a big lag between what you see on Petri dish and what you see in humans.
Yeah.
Right. So starting from, you say, we know so much about DNA, RNA cells. So starting from that understanding, coming to a phenomenon on a bench to a phenomenon in human being is a huge travel. And that's why we need to focused global targeted efforts with help of whatever resources we have to cover this path, which is hugely long.
Right. And that explains a lot of things. I mean, so coming back to the gravity of problem, I was just, I remember, when you look at, for example, life expectancy, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of increase in life expectancy happened because we could prevent a lot of child mortality as well as maternal mortality during childbirth, right? And part of that was also infections, especially for the woman bearing kids, right? Absolutely. So are we looking for going back to that kind of
no,
even in that context?
Yeah, the neonatal wards, I mean, we mentioned this very shortly when we were talking before. We said there's something called as last resort drugs, right? Yeah. These are the drugs which are, so you can imagine drug discovery as waves. And then you can imagine that there is something which was discovered in a last wave.
Yes.
So resistant these drugs or in hospitals, right? But if you look at neonatal wards in the hospital now, they're already on last resort drugs. So one of my friend, maybe this was 6 to 7 months ago, a child was born and, apparently had the blood. So, if you know that whenever the child is born, they immediately take out blood on the first day and they do different markers, because many a times child may not be capable of displaying symptoms like fever or, a lot of complications since it's just a newborn.
Yes.
So you look at blood markers, and the child showed some marker of infection. So the 48-hour-old baby was on 2 last resort drugs combined. You have to remember these drugs are last resort not only because we have discovered them late, they are also not very good for toxicity to your body. You have your liver and your kidney takes a toll when you have to clear, because antibiotic needs to be cleared out from a system, right? It's a foreign molecule. Anything foreign goes into your body, your liver and your kidney have to do an overtime to kill them.
Yes.
But neonatal wards are already on last resort antibiotics, many a times in a combination. The baby was saved.
Yes.
But imagine that now to save a baby without any apparent symptoms, the baby had markers in the blood. There was no, I mean, this is the stage it has reached. Imagine 5 years down the line, you have a baby newborn with a fever or jaundice that is beyond control.
Yes.
I don't know how much we'll have in our hands to treat such cases.
I see. That's a pretty grave situation.
It is indeed.
So and what kind of efforts are currently being taken compared to we had like a no effort scenario and the best effort scenario? Right now, what is the kind of leadership we have, and what kind of resources are being pumped in? Because if you look at how much we spend on wars, for example, globally, and the total cost of war would be in trillions, right? How much we spend on, for example, fashion clothing or diamonds, or I mean, you just name it. Like how much India spends, for example, on Bollywood movies, and people spend on watching Bollywood movies. I mean, count Hollywood, it's hundreds of billions probably. So I don't think
I say this.
There should be shortage of resources to pump in solving this issue.
No, I say this many times privately, and I hope people get the crux of what is it that I'm trying to say. But we need a tragedy. We need an AMR based tragedy to make. I'll give you an example. So, for example, genetically inherited disorders, which are somewhat rare, have been focus of research, but in a very limited sense. And some of these disorders you could actually diagnose while it's in embryos in a womb, and a lot of things could happen when it comes to rare genetic disorders. Recently, one of the countries in EU, their so-called king, prince, I don't know what they had, one of the kid had the rare genetic disorder. within next 5 years, that country made it as a part of government insurance, where every kit, I don't know in a US dollar, but in INR, it costs something like 25,000 rupees. So that is at least $250, right?
Yeah.
Right? 300 US dollars.
Let's say $300.
So now this $300. So the $300 test now is mandatory for any government insurance. So every kid being born is now getting screened for this genetic disorder. And even if you're detecting, let's say 1% of, so see, basically it could do this, right? I mean, before this thing happened, government could do this, but you need a tragedy to happen before government will do it. Could do it and will do it has a huge difference.
And the tragedy should happen at some level, because if it happens like in a small village somewhere, to some people who don't have much voice.
That's more like Madhur, that tragedies should happen. More like me is we need a tragedy for people to realize, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else. I mean, like, you know, people are not realizing that this is, see, simple thing. How many times, forget about some of the countries where, you know, politics is done in a very different way, but countries where politics actually happens with a discussion where people have opinion. How many times things like AMR, global health challenges are on agenda, you know? So this is where local people need to make change. They need to bring these on agenda. You need to discuss this, that what are you going to do for public health, right?
You know, I always give this example. So for example, when you look at the map of Earth and you see, you know, how much it is green and how much it is forest, look at, for example, Himalayas on map, how much is classified as wild forest or, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3, in terms of how biodiverse it is. When you actually go there, go on a hike, and go inside the forest, you see it's so sparse and there are wood mafias, you know, taking off all the wood, and there's not much left inside actually. Between the snow cap and the shivaliks, there's very little trees left right now. And even those are pretty new and plantations. And same in Karnataka and southern India, in the biodiversity hotspots.
I'm sure you know that in COVID, people said that we literally gave biodiversity 5 extra years by just staying at home for a year.
Exactly.
So we should, I mean, it is a sign of what we need to do.
And then the same thing I talk about, you know, I say people about science, you know, on paper, we have thousands of scientists, working. But if you look at how much time they spend just writing grants, just submitting these articles to Elsevier or to, you know, Manuscript Central versus editorial manager, and formatting and, you know, a number of bureaucratic aspects, how much talent goes into that instead of being able to actually tackle the real issues.
Absolutely.
Even among the efforts which are supposed to concentrate on those, it's tiny.
I mean, I'm sure you and me both know that whenever somebody says, sorry, I missed out on a meeting or I was late, it's never because I was reading a paper. It was always because I had a grant deadline, right? Everybody's late because they had a grant deadline. Nobody was trying to read the paper, do a outreach to a public, or trying to actually, you know, even do data analysis. I've never seen anybody saying I got late because I was doing data analysis. It was only because I had a grant deadline. So it's pathetic, I feel.
No, it is. I mean, there's no shortage of talented people, but unless they get the opportunity and they get the mind space to tackle these issues, right? You learn, you like, for example, you yourself have invested 50 to 20 years understanding this phenomena, and you are at a level at which you can think and plan. And now if all your time goes into just writing grants to get like this meager money and then report what you did about it, how are we going to solve this issue? Right?
Yeah.
I see. So, what else would you like to add? I think we have covered enough grounds, but still something which you would like to add.
No, I think, you know, I think if nothing else, it would also help just youngsters to get attracted to the problem, because, you know, you might think, but.
Well, I'm young and we are young.
No, my point is that in the same generation. Right? So you need people who, even if you're a parent or, you know, you're a teenager, I think it would help for you to be aware of these things, because you'll be surprised to see that once you're aware of a problem, how many things you can do differently, maybe ever so slightly, but differently. So I think it is nice to reach out to talk more about this. And, you know, I don't know whether you feel the same, but I've been told by many people that, you know, I like to see your passion, but I would just want you to, maybe if nothing else, remember me talking about this, you know, next time anything related to antibiotic comes in, and, Just maybe once you refuse to the doctor saying, maybe I'll just wait for 3 days and see, if I really have a bacterial infection.
But why young? I mean, so let's look at our demography. Who has to take the leadership? Is it our older generation, or is it the young people, and why? What's the reason for that?
See, when it comes to policy, the leadership has to be with whoever, working class, me, people 10 years older than us, or maybe 5 years younger than us. But that is a kind of change. I'm saying that, I think it will happen when there is a push from the public. And I think the push will come. So also, many of these things are habitual. You try and think that how many times as a kid, as a grown up, we have been exposed to antibiotics. So we need to make it a different thing. You should think of it as arsenic. You should think of it something that you don't go to. So I think that kind of change will happen in a young mind. It's very hard for us to turn ways now, though we can dedicate our workforces, we can dedicate our talent to solve the problem. The lifestyle changes, I think, need to happen in the generations to come, that they need to think of life as without antibiotics as far as possible. This is something that we only go to when it is absolutely needed. It is a two-edged sword. Right now for us, in fact, antibiotic has become like a nutrition thing. We take antibiotic. So you need to know it is a two-edged sword. You can, just because it is not harmful at that tiny instant when you consume it, doesn't mean it is not harmful. So, that's why I said that I feel that younger generation can bring a lifestyle change, and our generation has to focus more on policies and talents and research and those kind of stuff.
So it falls under the domain of tragedy of the commons problem, right? Do we have like empirical models or economic models to solve these tragedy of the commons problems in general, which can also be applied to AMR?
I have thought a bit about this, and I think there are some models as well. But you have to remember that in a tragedy of commons, there is an implicit understanding of knowledge. See, tragedy of commons assumes that everyone can exploit the source. Here the problem is that people are not aware that me taking antibiotic is harming someone else. That's the problem here. Tragedy of commons will begin when knowledge is so widespread that every time person takes an antibiotic, thinks it doesn't matter. I feel better at this point of time. It might harm others later. But this kind of understanding is not there. Antibiotics are getting blindly consumed. They are given to animals. People don't even know that they have the same antibiotics. If you actually go to many places where farmers or animal husbandry people do not know what is in that pack. It has been prescribed saying this is good for your cow, and they are just giving it to cows, right? So it is not in a classical sense tragedy of commons.
And they also feel the more we give, if it is helping, like let's give a little more to our cow, right? I love this cow. I need to feed this cow
absolutely.
a little more antibiotic.
Think of another level. The farmer next to me is giving it. So that becomes even more dangerous, because then you're making, see, if you give this problem now to a farmer, explain everything, then tragedy of commons will come in, and the farmer will say, but will all the farmers in my locality stop? Otherwise, then my cows are more susceptible to the disease and other cows are not.
But don't you think these things can be tackled at the policy level, where you just steeply increase the price of antibiotics, for example, at least in terms
so I have been, at least in India, I have been involved in a meeting where there were clinical people, pharma people, because you remember pharma is one of the biggest antibiotic player, because they leave everything in a wastewater, which is one of the biggest tragedies. So there were pharma, animal husbandry, and there is agriculture representative from all the bodies. I was actually there personally in that meeting. And then everyone discussed, how animal usage, environment, blah, blah, blah. And you can imagine that in a government panel, somebody who works with human beings, a clinical medical representative, somebody from pharma, these are typically this somehow very charismatic, and because they hold a lot of power, right? And she was actually a lady, this poor lady from animal husbandry, she says, you know what, I'm listening to all of you, but I do not really see any study that clearly shows that this was a locality, cows were fed with ampicillin, and you found residues of ampicillin in people's food. And if you actually look at it, there are literally not even enough studies that you can count on your, there are enough studies you can count on your fingers, which actually show this correlation. So the people in animal husbandry are saying, you are basically now trying to target a weak player. You're saying that because clinical medicine and pharma is so strong politically, that now you have a scapegoat in terms of animal. So see, this is a kind of stuff where we need research. And now tomorrow I'm going to write a grant for studying this. My grant is going to get rejected because I'm not a zoologist. So this is a kind of barriers that we need to kill, because you need to. So I have a person who works with cows. He's a malaria guy, okay, but he just got fed up of all of this, and he said, okay, I will do it. I will work with cows. The guy has such a hard time raising money, for this, because he's a malarial guy. Yeah. He has been working with viruses. No agency would give him funding.
And what kind of money he's looking for?
See, because you have to now set up sampling at, I mean, come on, it is going to be peanuts if you think about
still let's say, are we looking for $100,000, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million?
In terms of dollars, I don't know, but let's say I can tell you in terms of 50 lakh rupees. What does that come to?
Yeah, it's like $60,000-$70,000, right?
See, you see my point. So, but it's so, and because still you have this link, you cannot convince this animal husbandry lady who's in charge of policy that, you need, and I actually feel for her, because she can, in a table, she sees it. She sees that she's the weakest link, and she feels that everyone is targeting my department.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to reduce pharma sales. That's what drives economy. They don't want to reduce clinical usage because they feel they're saving lives.
Yeah.
And animals is something you can do away with. And then she tells stories like, see, farmer has one cow. The milk that one cow gives is a livelihood of a farmer. So you're basically telling me to ask the farmer to take a risk of not giving antibiotic to that cow.
Yeah.
Do you think this is fair? And it's just, he's become so complicated as soon as you go to,
So can't we have some young politician, for example, they can make it a logo of their next election campaign, right? Won't it work? That if I come in, I'll make sure that we solve the problem of antibiotic resistance, which, if you don't elect me, is going to kill most of us.
My next idea is to get somehow hooked a Bollywood star. I think that is what is going to work.
But they would ask for money.
No, exactly. So get them hooked, somehow find somebody who has a little bit of sense, who thinks this is worth. I don't know what to do. I'm just kidding here. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding here. But, I feel young politician who will put this out even seems for me even more difficult.
Right. I mean,
when you look at people do it, unless people start seeing it, so what politicians do, they basically look at what people feel for. If people feel for roads, I'll make road my agenda. If people feel for national flag, I will make national flag my agenda. Yes. So people need to feel for AMR. Only then politician will make it.
See, I see a lot of activism everywhere. In fact, to an extent that I see a lot of scientists not doing science and doing activism for the most part these days. And to be honest, even I'm trying to do a little bit of that these days.
But okay, that's a luxury you have in US. Okay, I have no time to do it.
Yeah, that's a luxury because of a number of factors. But what I was trying to get at is, like, for example, you look at any Netflix movie, a Netflix show, right? They also do a lot of they kind of slice in a little bit of activism about one issue or the other issue, in a very sometimes blatant and sometimes not so blatant ways. Why has this not become a part of conversation? Like, for example, when you look at old slogans, for example, during the Vajpayee time in India, we had this Hum Do Hamare Do logo, right, to curb the population or to reduce population explosion. We had steps which government took, to raise awareness. Or we had this, when Lifebuoy was launched, right, Hindustan Unilever started this soap Lifebuoy, and we had increased awareness of hand washing. And this happened in early 1900s in the US, like when toothpaste came for the first time, and a lot more hygiene products.
Or even anti-smoking campaign in US.
Or anti-smoking campaign, right? Which was successful all over the world, right?
Yeah.
So can't we have that? Or we can definitely have that. Why are we not having that? Are we busy with things that don't matter?
No. I feel because the problem, the suggested solutions are too complicated. With Hum Do Hamare Do, it was very simple. Stop having kids.
Yeah.
Have two and stop. Smoking, don't smoke.
Yeah.
Lifebuoy, wash your hands. But with AMR, I cannot give a clear-cut message, because I have to tell them that you have to understand when you need antibiotic. Only then you take it. See, the message has become complicated. It is not suitable for ad campaign. I need to tell them that when you're going to the hospital, doctor giving you antibiotic is not necessarily a bad thing. You need to find out whether you need to. So I don't think people have, that's why I say young generation, we don't have this. If you look at adults of our generation, they don't have a mindset that a message could be layered. It may not give me a clear-cut instruction about what to do, I need to understand what is happening and then react on it. I
Probably
think
we
that's
need
where
to
the
go
problem
at the level
lies.
of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts as well, if
But it could
helps.
misfire. I mean, you could go to I'm worried, for example, like it happened in anti-vaccine.
Yes.
It backfired so badly. The message was nuanced. It was saying that you should only take because I know there were instances where vaccines were given for no reason. Yes, some diseases, but then it backfired so badly that now you're getting polio back in Europe. That's how badly it backfired, So it's very risky trying to give a nuanced
it's a
message.
Precarious situation.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, and now if you think about it, any scientist would tell you, I would rather have unnecessary vaccines than not having the necessary ones. Right? The diseases which we have managed to eradicate almost are coming back. It's too dangerous. I would have rather had a kid given a vaccine that was unnecessary, because there was no clear-cut evidence of having side effects of it. It was only that it is unnecessary. Why are you giving it to a kid? Right? But it completely backfired.
So let's say that I give you, or not I give you, but you get the full authority, right? You became the most powerful person in the country, or like, for example, a WHO, or for example, you become a dictator, right? Let's say. And you can dictate any laws, you can dictate any campaign, you can dictate any kind of money put in to solve this issue. What are some of the things which you would do, now, based on the priority?
Before I give an answer on a lighter note, when I was in second standard, I was asked that what is it that you want to be? And I said, I want to be the first female dictator of the world, because there's everything first female which had been done by that time. I could only not see a female dictator. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. But I think if I become that, what I would want to do basically is, the kind of things I said, that you somehow need to, I don't know how, but you need to get to pharma companies, all the big five, big fours of the world, to invest into antibiotic research. That is the first thing. I feel still at the level of national or international policies, people are trying to play safe when it comes to stewardship. I think they're not being... So, for example, you cannot give hospital a permission to become a tertiary care center unless you have a strong stewardship program. You see, many of the hospitals, if you look at the hospitals are set up 10 years down the line, you need some accreditation. They say, oh, we need a stewardship program. No, it will not work.
Right.
The accreditation agencies, if you look at, most of the times the stewardship they ask to do internally, which I feel is problematic. You need to do it outside. Somebody else needs to go into the hospital, start scraping the surfaces and see what antibiotic is. This is at the level of hospitals. When it comes to animal section, I feel that we first of all need to understand that animal and agriculture is a huge part of how we survive. So rather than, sort of making them, getting them on a leash, I would get pharma companies on a leash who are they're basically exporting all their production to India and China, because you can put pretty much anything in Yamuna, right? So all the companies who have offices in US and Switzerland and in Europe, all their basic primary molecule gets manufactured in India or China.
Right. When we go to CVS or Walmart in the US, actually most of the drugs, especially the generic ones, are coming from few factories in India. And the key pharmaceutical ingredient, which is called KPIs, they're mostly made in China.
They're mostly made in China. And then the US company says that we are in line with all the requirements that we have for wastewater treatments and whatever it is when it comes to US. But they are not enforcing those on Indian companies. See, in a way, if you see, it is now coming and backbiting them, because resistance is a global phenomenon. It might come to you 10 years later, but it's still going to come to all over the world. Right? So allowing it to be in the rivers of China and India is not really helping anyone. So they know what means need to be taken. It's just that they see it's cheaper. So I would rather correct all these things. Let the antibiotic become a little bit more expensive, because it's fine. I mean, person in India who is buying antibiotic over the counter is not dying because of bacterial disease. Even if it doesn't get cured for 8 days, the person gets better eventually. But the person in an ICU who is getting the resistant infection has lost life already. Right? So it is okay. Let antibiotics be more expensive.
And for the person in ICU, the cost of antibiotic is actually not a limiting factor compared to what all being spent.
Exactly. So, so just because pharma company wants more sales, you need the antibiotic to be cheaper, and for them to be cheaper. So it's such this vicious cycle, which I'm sure everyone knows where it is. So given all authority, you need to sort of break into these points in between.
See, what I don't understand is from every factor, human health or good health is good for economy and companies in general. longevity means more consumption. Longevity means, more revenue, more taxation. Like in every possible way, longevity actually helps the society.
But you are forgetting your basic evolutionary training here, Madhur. We were not taught to think of 20, 30 years later. Right. Every pharma company is thinking they want to increase they want to have maximum profit in coming 2 years.
Coming 2 years, yeah.
This year or coming 2 years. I think that is the problem. That is the problem when, and that's why I think every problem that we're facing right now is basically big problems.
Yeah.
It's basically telling us that we were not thinking 40, 50 years down the line.
Yeah, that's actually so true. If you, especially in the developed nation, there are no small problems left. Yeah, there are relationship problems, there are abusive problems, but those are like, you have
personal
created
problems.
Those personal problems, right? At the cellular society, I think there's a lack of problem at the individual level. And then there are problems which are so huge that they are beyond any single individual's capacity.
Absolutely. But you have to realize that some of these huge problems. So yeah. I think, I really admire that, because I think that Western nations or developed nations generally were a little bit more long-sighted.
Of course. Yeah.
But I think they were long-sighted in also a little bit narrow-sighted way, in the sense they exported their problems to other nations. So they had a good run of 4 or 5 decades, and then they realized, just this example, that when you are putting out production of antibiotics in the other countries, maybe your river stayed clean for 40, 50 years. And after that, it is coming back to bite you.
Right.
And many people give similar examples. So I'm not an expert in arms dealings, and everywhere it seemed that their long-sightedness was still not long enough to think of in a global sense. I think their vision still stayed at the country level, and they did well. And only now we are starting to see, and that's why I sometimes feel that now that you're realizing the problems are global, maybe it's already time to think of a universe. Maybe we are doing something which is troubling things beyond our globe. And every time we realize there is a problem, we have already lost the chance of thinking about it before. You already feel climate change. You should have thought about it 40 years ago.
No, but then we have a very different kind of leadership now, which thinks that we'll probably go to Mars, and like we have the Earth is destroyed enough, and I think it's a better idea to leave for Mars. And not realizing a lot of things, like we can't even live in, for example, Thar Desert, or in the middle of Egypt for 5 days, or Death Valley, for example, right? So we have this kind of mindset that in the long run doesn't matter. We are anyway going to leave this planet.
But you see, that's why you see the problem. That's why I'm so scared of putting this on politics, because the problem is so nuanced. About AMR, right? These are people who think we could go on Mars. You realize how the...
No, exactly. Our leadership, if you look at what leadership we have in general, across the world, I'm not calling any individual, but I'm saying leadership in general as a voice. It's very narrow. It's very rhetoric now compared to what we had, 5 decades back, for example. When we were trying to achieve actually big things in life as a society.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Shraddha, it was amazing talk. Just before you leave and we end our conversation, what is your recommendation for those excited kids, okay, this is the problem and I'll devote my life to this issue. What kind of career guidance would you give them?
So, what I would say is that anybody who is excited, excited, the good thing about AMR is that it has many facets. So, for example, the place where I work, Ashoka University, is actually a liberal arts university. And we are already engaging some media people, artists, because you need outreach. You need scientific things to be told in simpler languages. You need actual research on bench. You need translational research. If you're a doctor, you need to practice antibiotic stewardship yourself. So I think I would first say that if you have not yet found your vocation, maybe look for that, what it is that you are passionate about. Data science, as in every other field in AMR, is a huge thing right now. There are things that people trying to do with machine learning. We didn't have time to talk about that today, maybe also a little bit too technical. But if you're a computer enthusiast, there are ways in which you could accelerate treatment in people by, machine learning algorithms. So I think I would say that first find what it is that you're passionate about, and almost everything. I have basically make things and mute presentations who we are currently using to make something to put in front of every public health official who's involved in AMR, like of a sign.
Yeah.
To say that I am part of this group, who is aware of AMR problem.
Right.
So she's making, so you can be of any vocation, and I think you can chip in to the problem of AMR.
And will it be charity, or you can actually make a serious career with your own financial objectives met along the process as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think studying evolution of antimicrobial resistance is probably one of the least likely financial goal achieving part of AMR, but still I have done it. I understand that people might have different financial goals, but I think from what I have known of world, what we call as a decent living, I think it's completely achievable. You don't have to sacrifice your life and your goals to travel to. In fact, if anything, I'm traveling probably the most because of my subject
Yes.
of my choice. And, traveling with a purpose, not just to, always put in some other things with it, etc. But I think you can just have a normal life and yet do something which is meaningful, something that is related to AMR, if you find AMR meaningful at all.
That's amazing. Lots of hope there and lots of optimism. I don't doubt that, humans we won't solve this issue. We have solved a lot of crises in the past. And I think we are waiting for the tragedy. Let's hope that comes soon. On the lighter note.
It's smaller, I hope that people see sense with a small tragedy. That's my hope.
Yeah. The smallest tragedy.
I'm an optimist.
Yeah. Yes. I myself am as well. To be clear. A little cynical, but optimist. So thanks, Shraddha. This was a very revealing conversation. I got to learn a lot, and I hope our viewers will learn a lot as well. And we hope that you will be back here talking more technical and telling much more about your specific research as well at some point in the future.
I would be happy to, and I want to thank you also for moving out of your interests, which are already very, very broad, but this still falls a little bit out of that. But I'm glad that you had me on board, and I had a lot of fun talking.
No, it was great.
I think we anyway talked for hours, so I think this was good doing it officially.
Yes. Thanks, Shraddha. It's late here. It's like morning 5 a.m. I'll probably hit the gym, and good luck to you for the rest of the day.
Have a nice day, you too. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.